Rocky's moved from under the wheelbarrow to over under my wagon there. There's my holy boots. I like to make a joke of them. I don't know if they showed up or not there. Hopefully they did. I got some replacement footwear coming tomorrow, though. I've ordered some replacement footwear because I think I've pushed these poor old things as far as I can push them. I'm going to move the phone around here and hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about. You know, the other one's not much better. Anyway, alright, I'm going to tell you a story. Here. It's kind of a funny story. I went to school in the 1970s. You know, I mean, I was born in 1968, so I went to grade school in the 1970s. It was very much a different time, you know. World really is nothing like it was back then. And mostly that's for the better in many ways, and it's for the worse in many ways too, you know. But anyway, I can remember a time that, you know, somebody that was born in the 80s or 90s or 2000s or whatever would have no clue how things really were, you know. So I'm going to tell this story, and those of you who were around back then, it'll resonate with you because you probably have similar memories of things that happened, you know, of the world being the way I'm going to describe it now. Anyway, we went to a separate school, which was a Catholic school. Here, Catholic schools were referred to as separate schools. There was the public system and the separate system. And our schoolyard was a field in behind the school. It was actually called the back field. That's what we used to call it, because it was a field with rocks and trees and weeds and, you know, grass and all that. And it was behind the convent. Of course, a lot of the nuns used to teach at the school, so the convent was next door. It was one of these deals where we had the school, the convent, the rectory, which was the priest house, you know, and then we had the church. And basically we had Grant Street on one end of it, we had Church Street on the other end of it that ran up beside the church, and then we had Wilson Street East that went in front of the school, and behind all of it there was a street called Arthur Street. Anyway, there was a fellow who lived down Grant Street a ways from the school, maybe a half a block or something down Grant Street when you got past there. And he had a goat. He kept a goat. The goat was always tied up with a rope in his yard, except that the goat used to chew for the root for the rope and it would get loose. And it'd come up to our playground. We'd be outside at recess time and this goat would come up there. And the goat would be chasing us around the schoolyard. And, you know, it would scare you half to death, really, you know, this thing. I mean, we weren't much taller than it was. We were just little kids, you know. And the thing would come up there and headbutting us and everything, you know, and basically wanting to fight with us, I guess, was the thing. Goats can be kind of cantankerous, you know. Anyway, he'd come up and he'd get mad at us because he would think that we were harassing or teasing his goat or whatever. And he'd be yelling at us, "You little bastards." He'd say, "Stop harassing my goat." Oh, we were just trying to get away from the damn thing, really, you know. But anyway, he managed to corral it there, and he'd take it home then. The thing would still have the chewed up rope around its neck where it had chewed through and gotten loose. But apparently that same guy that had the goat, this shows how different the world was back then. As I know a guy who told me that he saw this happen. In 1969, the Prime Minister at that time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who's actually our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau's father, who he was, you know, apparently he came to Perth, and they had some big thing up at Stewart Park, which is a public park right in the downtown core of Perth, Ontario, Canada. And he had something going on up there anyway, and when that was finished, there was like a procession of vehicles, and you know, Trudeau was riding in the back of an open car, of a convertible, and apparently this fellow who owned the goat that used to come up or chase us around the yard and everything, and he'd come up there and he'd be just hopping mad at us because he'd blame us for the goat running around and being agitated, I guess. He thought we were teasing it or whatever. That same guy, he'd gone over. The procession came to a stop at the corner there before they rounded the corner to go out onto the main street of Perth, which is a street called Gore Street East, East and Gore Street West. It was Gore Street East where this happened. Anyway, Gore. The cars all come to a stop, and this fella that had owned the goat, he went over and just reached into the open car and he put his clenched fist right up under Trudeau's chin. And anyway, he did that, kind of shook his fist at Trudeau, put his fist under Trudeau's chin, and then he just pulled his arm out of the car and backed up, and the procession moved on. Apparently nothing happened. He didn't get shot or beaten or tackled or anything. Nowadays all three of those things would happen, I'm sure. But anyway, that's just a little story about that fella anyway. You gotta figure, if you live with a goat, you probably don't fear much, But it was a friend of mine who remembered seeing that happen anyway, and it told me the story years later. But when the nuns would come in with their car, they used to have to go through the schoolyard to get to the convent. They used to just toot the horn when they come in through the gate. And the one part of the schoolyard that was paved was the driveway where they'd come along one end of the schoolyard to get to the convent. And so, of course, all the little girls used to play hopscotch there, and they used to skip there with their skipping ropes and stuff. So you'd see the big old Pontiac they drove. They had a 72 Pontiac Laurentian. And they'd pull in there, and you'd hear toot toot, and you'd see the girls all scattering with their skipping ropes and everything, and then the car would go through, and then they'd all go back to what they were doing. And we had one teacher there. Her name was Sister Bernice Boyle, and Sister Bernice Boyle was not a happy person. I'll just put it that way. She really wasn't. Life hadn't gone the way she had hoped that it would, and she had some good reasons, I'm sure, not to be happy, and she wasn't. And she was also a very kind of a worried person, a person who tended to make things bigger than they really were, and had a temper, too. And one time, she was our music teacher. And one time in music class, I guess we must have been cutting up a little bit or something, I don't know anyway. She wasn't too happy with what we were doing. I can't remember now just exactly what set her off. It generally didn't take very much. And this was in the wintertime. And she just went off on us. She just slammed a yardstick down on the desk and she says, "Sweet mother of Jesus!" Like that, that's the way she'd curse at us. Either that or she'd go, "Jesus, Mary, Joseph!" But that time it was the sweet mother of Jesus thing. And she'd slam the yardstick down and she'd roar that. And then she told us, she said, "You children, you don't appreciate me, and I nearly died last night in a horrible car accident, and you don't appreciate me. And you need to learn to be appreciative of people, because I nearly died, and here you are acting up, and I nearly died." And she started telling this story that her and the other nuns had been in the car, and I guess they had hit some ice or something, and the car had spun around, and it had gone into the ditch. And she said, "We went into the ditch," and she said, "We were nearly killed." She said, "The car was destroyed. The car was totally destroyed, and we were nearly killed. And, I'm lucky even to be alive, and then now I got to put up with this." Well, of course, at recess time, when we had to go past the garage where the car was kept on our way to the back field, all us boys, we got to see this car. The car's destroyed. We got to see the car. So there was a side door went into the garage. We kind of snuck along the side of the garage, and we went in there, and because we were going to look at this car that was completely destroyed. Because we were sure to be in there, because that's where they stored it. So we go in there anyway, and the car was in there. And what had happened was, the old Pontiacs used to have a nose that came to a point. These were big cars, big heavy cars, and they had a nose that come to a point in the center. And there were two chrome inserts which was the radiator grill with louvers, basically, on each side of the nose, and then they went across the front of the car to the headlights and stuff, where the headlights were and stuff. And what had happened was, these were just made out of pot metal, though. They looked more solid than they were. They were metal, but they were pot metal, which is really brittle, and they were just chrome plated. So they looked really shiny and really nice and really solid, but and they were heavy, but appearances can be deceiving. Those things really weren't as solid as they seemed. And what had happened is, on one side, the grill had busted loose right up around the nose of the car, and it was partially pushed into the car, basically. So it was just kind of cockeyed and pushed in at an angle. And so there was some damage to the car, but that was it anyway. I mean, you could have gotten into that car and driven it across the country like that. It wouldn't hurt anything, But she was talking